archives. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Rhonda, and I'm the lead archivist for the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Program project. We are building a digital archive based on our materials that we've been collecting since 2010. Professor Margaret Ramey is the director of CRRJ, and we've been talking about death and memorialization and trauma and racial violence and homicides and averted deaths for the past day and a half. And we've got to listen to the personal testimonies of descendants and relatives and community members. And this is kind of what the basis of what our collection is going to be. When I speak with my colleagues about building a digital archive on lynching, they say, oh, that's great, because I just send my students to that website without sanctuary. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that website, but it's a collection of lynching photographs. And it basically portrays the spectacle of lynchings from the 1930s, 1920s, 1940s, and it's really the horrors of lynching in terms of the destruction of the black body, where you have these images of dismembered torsos and charred bodies, and the kind of text that's written on the back of the postcards that say things like, this is what we do to our neighbors down here, we get out of line. And so when people talk about this collection, they don't understand that these were actual postcards. And I try to paraphrase it as, if you go to Disney World or you go to Las Vegas, you get a postcard that says, having a wonderful time, wish you were here. It was on the same line that they collected these photographs. And so when I talk to them, my colleagues and others, about what our archive is going to be like, I talk about it and I describe it as it's going to be holistic, and it's going to be cathartic for the families and communities, in the sense of we are looking at unsolved racial homicides and we are trying to restore lives. We're trying to help families understand what happened, communities understand what happened in these places, because as we heard from some of these stories, people fled and their history and their lineage has been erased from the Southern landscape. And so they've gone to places like Iowa and Ohio and Utah, and just all kinds of places where you never think African Americans would be. But in terms of haven and a place to go, that's where they went. And so our collection tries at the heart to talk about not just the case, not just the legality of the case, but who these people were, whether they were honorably discharged servicemen, whether they were unsuspecting juveniles, whether they were wives, mothers, daughters, nieces, nephews, granddaughters, cousins. This is what you'll find when our database is complete and when our archive is made public. And so it's available for students, researchers, scholars, and relatives, because it has a large component of genealogy and genealogical research behind it. And so as we talk about this panel today, as an archivist and a historian, I was asked to assemble a group of colleagues who I think would be able to speak also and contribute to the conversation about what archives are in terms of documents, but also physical spaces. And so for me, in looking at segregation and Jim Crow, there's a great deal of archival silence. The silence of what is in these collections versus what is not in these collections. And so because we all come from different institutions, colleges, institution, personal project, computers and digital technology, I wanted us to be able to speak about archives in terms of the documents, in terms of digitization, in terms of training, resources, technology, and collections management. So on the panel today, Wayne Coleman, he's the head of archives here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It's an archive and a museum. It's an educational facility. It's been here since 1992. He's been here since 1995. So being a native of New Orleans, he worked at Tulane at the Amistad Collection, is that right? In Tulane, and Tulane's campus. And he is responsible for the digitization of the oral history project. And one piece to our project is oral histories as well as collecting documents. And so I'd like Wayne to talk about the kind of technology that BCRI uses and collections management. How did the collections get here in the first place? And just who are his users? And who comes here and who does the research? R.J. Ramey is the creator of the digital history project, MonroeWorks.org, MonroeWorkToday.org. He's the founder of Out Studio, based in San Francisco, a company he started in 2015 to design more compelling materials for history teachers and museum audiences. The work is focused on stories that are overlooked by standard textbooks. He looks at the work of Monroe Work, who was the archivist at Tuskegee Institute, and he collected information about lynchings from the 1890s to the 1930s, kind of picked up with the research of Ida B. Wells when she did the research for Red Record, her work, and then contributed that work to the NAACP. And so RJ is what we call a public historian. He is not teaching, he is teaching outside of the classroom in a non-traditional sense, using digital technology to educate and inform wider audiences. And last but not least is my friend, Dr. Tonia Sutherland, an assistant professor in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama. She was so gracious to drive here and bring her lovely family, husband and son. That's lovely.
Pictures, gotta get pictures.
Global in scope, Tonia's research focuses on entanglements of technology and culture, with a particular emphasis on digital culture, data, and society. Critical engagements with information and communication technologies, are both theory and practice, and community and cultural informatics. Tonia's work, her recent work, focuses on 21st digital century cultures and racialized violence, critically examining issues of race, ritual, and embodiment in digital spaces. And we had a conversation, we met, and she was doing research on the hologram of Tupac Shakur. So very innovative, looking forward to your talk today. And so in no particular order, whoever would like to go first, whoever's queued up, got images to show or a website?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay, so RJ is going to present for us. Yes.
Hi, my name is RJ, and first of all, I just wanted to thank Margaret for inviting me. This has been just such an amazing experience. I'm on this panel to talk about a digital history project that I created called Monroe Work Today, and I'll get into showing you a little bit about what it is. But essentially, it is a map of all the known U.S. lynchings in the United States of people of color for a high school audience. It builds on the work of Tuskegee Institute, which again we'll talk about, and then the Tonia and Beck database that Dr. Noble will talk about, and then many other lynchings that have been documented since then. But the part that I'm most proud about, and I really must say, is the last one. It's for a high school audience, and that's my contribution of this weekend or in this world. So I want to emphasize that I tailored my talk to young people, and generally to a white audience. So I'd be really curious in the discussion to hear what you guys have to say. And I'm here to talk about the power of archives. But first, Dr. Jones asked me to introduce myself a bit, like who is this person who created a website like this. So let me just introduce myself. What is a biracial kid from suburban Ohio who's now 40 years old, doing in a room with so much talent and so many amazing scholars? I'm standing here in the shadow of Reverend Shuttlesworth, and I have no letters to my name, so don't believe anything I have to say. But as an introduction, basically everything you need to know about me can be summed up by what you could interpret from this picture. You might wonder if this is an awkward kid. Yes, indeed I am. You might think maybe he's a computer person. Yeah, I think I am. Probably never had a girlfriend. Yeah, that's true too. I wanted to take just a moment to note that as somebody born in 1976, I am essentially the first group of kids to grow up in the United States that has never known legal segregation. So it's not lost on me that I'm sitting and standing in this block where, as we talked about earlier, a transformation happened in the United States. But my colleagues in my generation is generation one of the democracy of the United States. And many of you in the room are generation zero, and you birthed this nation. But that sort of places me in where my interest comes from and the background that I have. The only other thing you need to know about me is that I really like math. I'm a bit of a geek, and I could like stare at this all day and just find it fascinating about the relationships of space to other space. That said, now, why am I here? In 2002, this book was written by Philip Dre, and my parents are liberals, so there was a book review in Time magazine, and I was home from college and read the book review, and I thought, oh, I want to read this. This is going to be good. And I tore out the page and took it back and filed it somewhere for when I would get to it. And I didn't find that piece of paper again until 2010. So 8 years later, I'm finally getting around to reading At the Hands of Persons Unknown. And I thought, I found this paper, I owe it to myself to read it now. And it's probably not even the best book written about lynching, but it certainly is very eye-opening. It is literally pages of text. There's no real photographs in it. I think there's a middle glossy section with some of the figures, the historical people. But it's essentially story after story after story, and it just blew me away. I think many people who don't have the luxury of growing up in the South or having this oral histories do not realize the history that this country has, and then when you have that moment of realization, it really is powerful. And I think when singers hit that point, they write a song, or when filmmakers hit that point, they make a movie, or when authors hit that point, they write a book. But remember that I like math. So as I'm reading this book, I am literally flipping through oh my God, show me the picture. Where's the map of all of these that happened? And there's no map in the book. It turns out if you search online, there were historical maps made sort of really of the time, data visualizations in the 1930s, but there's no with the accuracy of the book, there's really no map there. So this is where that awkward, weird kid story gets weird. It's actually been emailed the Tuskegee Institute, the Tuskegee University archive now, where Philip Dre had based much of his research, and he really highlights how Tuskegee Institute in its time was the conscience of a nation, and the numbers coming out of Tuskegee were what people really did not contest. They would argue with NAACP, they would argue with the Chicago Tribune, but coming out of the South and coming out of Alabama by respected scholars, they were like, okay, that really happened. So I flew to a research appointment in Tuskegee, Alabama, and met the archivist and sort of explained what I wanted to do, and he was surprisingly supportive. And that's where I met Monroe Work. What I learned is that the conscience of the nation in Tuskegee was a person. He was the first director of research of the Department of Research and Records at Tuskegee, and he had been hired by Booker T. Washington to start up the department and start up the research. And he documented many, many things. He certainly wasn't only a documenter of lynchings. He was fascinated by the progress that had been made since emancipation, the amount of economic growth that the Black community had created. He was a passionate advocate for Black people's health in a time when the average life expectancy was in early 30s. You sort of read his biography and you realize that he was kind of a nerd too. He really liked to do the bookish research. But I don't give this presentation without mentioning his wife, Florence Hendrickson work. From all accounts, they had a very happy marriage and really nice partnership. She probably was a dork too, and there are stories of people seeing her and him reading in the candlelight by the light of their house. The research that he would later report on. So I became fascinated with the story, and which we now pick up to what you all know, which is that the Tuskegee Institute houses these primary documents, these records. But also in box 120 or 130, there is this first database of lynching victims. It's typewritten on paper. It probably actually was typewritten after Monroe Work's time. I'm still trying to track down if it was Jesse Guzman or who had actually picked it up. But here we have an Excel spreadsheet in circa 1960 of all of the documentation of Tuskegee, and I thought, okay, maybe I could make this map. And of course, I'm in a long tradition, and everyone in this room is in a long tradition of I.W. Wells, Monroe Work, and he would publish, starting in 1912, these numbers that then became the most trusted in the nation. And when I speak to high school audiences, I like to point out that they see this and they're like, yeah, that looks like history stuff, yeah, that looks like old people stuff. So I did want to translate just what was happening, is that Monroe was blogging before blogging was cool. Like, he was posting year after year these numbers and other amazing things that were happening in the Black community, but also, like we've all been doing, trying to generate enough attention to this problem, enough outrage to this problem to change it. So this is really more of an accurate representation in contemporary terms of what Monroe Work was doing. So what was I going to do? I am not a historian. I don't have a degree or a PhD, but I am really good at writing book reports. So I decided that I would embark on this project and sum up the sheer scope of the problem that Monroe Work and everyone after him has worked to report. And remember that I like maps. So I began with the documents of Tuskegee, and also, as Dr. Knowles mentioned, this famous book in 1995, which actually corrects some of the data. Monroe Work was occasionally wrong. I think he had a bad internet connection or something. So occasionally the dates were wrong, off by a few days, or the county was like grossly wrong. There's a recorded lynching in Madison, Wisconsin, which turns out was in Madison County, South Carolina. So, if you make a map, you certainly need to have the correct information. And this is the beginning of modern research, which has clarified the record. And then I find other books on Central Texas, on New Mexico, on California, on a study in Kansas, a study in Nebraska, and pretty soon I'm reading more books than I ever signed up for. And I should point out that each of these books, as you read them, there's a 2015 book on Kansas, and where the official Tuskegee record was something like 58 lynchings in Kansas during that time, this modern author has found something like 168. So he was off by like 30% of what actually happened. So it brings me to my public history website, which is sorted in 3 parts. It introduces you to Monroe Work. It also, to emphasize that people were saying that the agency of people at this time, there's always been heroes. At any time in our atrocious parts of history, there have been people standing brave. So I wanted to introduce readers to some of them. There's certainly Ida Wells. I'll just point out a few. The Mary Talbert, for example, who led a letter writing campaign, which later inspired Jesse Daniel Ames in Texas to have the American Association of Southern Women do a campaign against lynching, and she was organizing white women to speak up and say, we don't need the protection against black men. So there's lots of heroes to learn about in context of what's happening. Another side note, Wing King v. Eureka was the first Supreme Court case to bring reparation demands to the United States government. The precedent for reparations is this case where Chinatown had been burned down in the city of Eureka, California. So again, there's just a history all across the United States that talks about this. It gets to then the map that I finally had the chance to build, but before I get there, I just wanted to mention that finally in this website, it asks you to discuss your investigation, to reflect on what you've learned. And you'll notice, I'll just point out, it's actually a little bit gentle to a white audience. It says, this website may be the first time that you've been privy to this level of violence, and so it's appropriate to sort of think about what this means. And I think we'll get into some of the value of that in speaking to audiences who have not really grappled with this before. But then, just as a sample of the map, it works on your cell phone. Feel free to use it or to take a note to work on it at home. The bottom is this timeline. It's interactive. You can, sort of pick the years that you want. So here's, this is 12 years of time right before the 1890s. And so these are 10-year, 12-year increments. It really never dies down. And then if you look at all of them at the same time, this is the history of white supremacy. The other part that I'm a little bit proud of is that it's very current. The books written in 2016 are in the database. This case is from CRRJ. This article appeared in the front page of the Washington Post as I was getting ready to make my website. And it turns out it was Margaret's team that had gotten it into the Washington Post. So again, that story is now accessible, or at least the beginnings of that story is now accessible. And then every dot has a link to the source material. You can click on this to bring you to the bibliography of that book. Click on the book to bring you to a place to get that book or buy that book. And so Dr. Jones asked me just to briefly touch on the resources that are available. Digitization is something that everyone in this room could do. All it took was the blood, sweat, and tears. But I must admit, actually, it took none of my blood. I lived a very privileged life, and all I really needed was a library card and sweat and tears. I also needed a server to host the website, and then some of that stuff costs money, so it's on my credit card. But here's the sweat. All of each of these books and their appendices and the revisions and the clarifying that this unnamed person really did have a name. You have to line that all up, and pretty soon this database is 6,000, 7,000 lines long. And that essentially took me about 5 years to do. The truth of the matter is life sometimes gets in the way, and I needed to pay rent. So I actually would predict that if I just got to focus on it as my full-time job, it would have taken me months to sort of work this. And then finally, yes, I'm a computer person. I know how to make a web page, but this isn't super fancy stuff. This is there's a mapping service that you can sign up for a free account and add dots to a map yourself. This isn't super complicated. And then finally, the audience, the results that I've been speaking to. We've had 100,000 people come to the website since it launched. It's about 100 people a day. It's pretty consistent, so about 3,000 people a month are seeing it for the first time. You sort of see when people come back, that new people a month. And I was able to, there's no place on the website to comment or debate about this, but what I was able to do is just see what people are posting publicly on social media. So I'm really spying on them. But I was actually a little bit touched or pleasantly surprised at what people were posting. And keep in mind, people are posting this, not anonymously like a rant. People are posting this to their social network, their family and their friends are reading this. So this, when powerful, informing, disturbing, it's eye-opening. Yeah, we had some dark history. This is almost too much to process. Oh, it looks like my county's on there. I didn't know. Yikes, and it was widespread, but this is not my mother, but this is the type of reaction my mom had, was just like I reading that book once, just really not grappling with what had happened. I had no idea how bad it was, #education. People are posting photos of the map, literally, I am helping people to rebroadcast. I just found out that a man was lynched in my hometown in 4 years of American history at Towson High School. No one ever told me that, but this interactive map finally did. I see California. And what he's referring to is actually, if you zoom in on California on the map, California is the proud owner of over 400 lynchings, which puts it up there with the highest states in the South. And again, most people just don't get taught that in school. And people are making the connections, and this is probably what I'm most proud of. These are plants, these are random strangers I don't know came up with insight. Deep healing happens when the full story is told and acknowledged. So I spend most of my time talking to white audiences. I don't mean to say that this solves the problem or that people are transformed, ready for reconciliation by this, but I have seen that it helps to dismantle the fragility of white audiences. They are ready to listen after seeing this map. It sort of brings a moment of pause, and I think there are better people and more established activists who can pick it up from here and get people ready to grapple with sort of the violence that we're talking about over here. So, in conclusion, my name is RJ. I really like maps, and I see your team member.
First, I'm going to really thank Rhonda for inviting me here today. It's just, these past couple of days, it's been really powerful to hear stories and. Yeah. I'm so soft-spoken. I apologize. Is that better? Okay. Okay. With a theater background, I should be able to do a little bit better. So, my name is Tonia Sutherland, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alabama. I teach in the Library and Information Studies program, and my research focuses on digital culture and archives primarily. So I've been doing some research over the past couple of years, sort of trying to connect historical lynching records to the records that have been coming out around modern day racialized violence and racialized terror. And there's a lot there. So this work started for me intellectually in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina happened. And I realized, looking at the images on television, that the American imaginary is kind of steeped in, American culture is kind of steeped in the imaginary of Black death. We have in this country kind of an obsession with the Black body, particularly the dead Black body. And, I started to notice that whenever I saw pictures of dead bodies on television or on the internet, that they were overwhelmingly Black bodies. You don't see dead 12-year-old white girls on the internet or on television. You just don't. But you see bodies floating in the overflowing waters of Lake Pontchartrain. You see images coming out of various countries on the African continent. But there's sort of no hesitation about showing the death of a Black person, regardless of how much trauma that might instill or continue to re-inscribe in communities. So I wanted to know why that was. Is it because Black people are dying at disproportionate rates? No, of course not. Are Black women and children, men, women and children, more prone to violent death, perhaps? But it started for me kind of an historical inquiry, and that's what led me to start looking at lynching records. And then I kind of discovered that there really weren't many of them out So as an archivist, I said, what's going on here with the archival record? Why are there so few archival records around lynching? So I really was looking for some kind of explanation. And I offer to you that this idea of what I'm calling archival amnesty. So in 1868, then President Andrew Johnson issued Proclamation 179, which provided amnesty to Confederate soldiers who had sworn renewed allegiance to the Union, and it returned all rights of property, with the exception of slaves, to Confederate landowners. And I thought, really what archives have done, what state archives in particular have done, is to extend this amnesty by not collecting and documenting racialized violence, particularly around lynching, and we see that now too in our current day moment where people are being murdered in our streets and there's no accountability, and certainly you don't see these records showing up in our whole repositories either. We've got newspaper accounts, and as we learned earlier, those newspaper accounts often differ from the accounts of family members and are often not fully representative of what we might call truth. So this historical project for me, I started to realize that that lynchings were localized, right? They were events that happened in communities, and that the spread of the knowledge of lynching really happened through the technologies of the day: trains, radio, telegraphs, the telegraph. And modern day technology does the same. So remember, I was looking for these connections between historical violence against Black people, against Black bodies, and contemporary violence. So, what's the role of technology in that? So as I started down this historical path, one of the first words that I encountered, let me tell you, when you do searches on Google for things like Black bodies and archives, you find horrific things. Soul-rendering things. The word souvenir was one of the first words that I encountered. And souvenir is the French word for to remember. And I really started thinking about dismemberment and how black body parts were taken from lynching victims and then sold as souvenirs. And I started thinking about what it meant to remember, or to remember, to put bodies back together, to put people back together, to make whole again. And that's really the work that I'm trying to do, both in my research and in my teaching. Scott said earlier that his current job in his current roles as in the state archives, that he doesn't really, that the work that he does doesn't so much come up in his current job. And that came as no big surprise to me, because it is in fact the case that state archives have not made the effort. They've extended Johnson's amnesty. They have, look, they're not collecting receipts, right? And without receipts, you don't get justice. And we know this because we have seen how receipts, how evidence, how records can help with restorative and transitional justice in places like Cambodia, where the photographs that were taken of prisoners are being used. Are being used in the trials right now. We've seen this in El Salvador after the genocide. We've seen this in South Africa with apartheid. Archival records have really held a very central role in working toward restorative and transitional justice. And here in the United States, I do believe, starting with Johnson's amnesty proclamation, and then sort of moving forward from that point, we don't have that evidence. It just doesn't exist, and that makes it really difficult for those who are calling for reparations, for those who seek transitional and restorative justice. For those who, like me, seek who are looking at the gaps in the vagaries and looking to make whole, where are the receipts? Where are the records? Where is the evidence? So I've also found that, as Rhonda said, I was doing a project on Tupac and his hologram, and that comes out of an interest in what I'm calling the Black digital afterlife. And that started around the time that Trayvon Martin was killed. You do a Google search for Trayvon Martin, you click on images, and across the top there's this bar, and it asks you, do you want to see this dead young man's body on the ground, or do you want to see this dead young man's body in a casket? You get to choose. Choose your own adventure. And it was sickening and unfathomable to me that even in death, there's this line, a really firm line between memorialization and, or maybe not so much a firm line, but there's a line between memorialization and commodification, and it gets crossed all the time. When we think about Facebook, we think about Google, we think about these corporate entities, their companies, every click equals an ad dollar, an advertising dollar. And so the more sensational the image, the more sensational the thing, the more clicks it gets, the more money. And so companies like Google and like Facebook are literally profiting off the deaths of Black people. And they continue to profit off the death of Emmett Till all of these years later. His mother said, let's have that open casket. I want the world to see what they did to my son. And now you do a Google search for Emmett Till, and the first image that you see is that open casket. And every click on that picture is an advertising dollar for Google. So, I want to say that evidence and receipts also don't always bring justice, right? So we see now that police have body cameras, and they're collecting that data, they're collecting those images, and there's sort of been this expectation that now that we're collecting all of this information, this data, we've got receipts, that there will be justice. And that hasn't turned out to be true, in part because of a couple of Supreme Court cases that have basically said that all a police officer has to do is say, I was scared in the moment, and the law is written in such a way that that's all it takes, that's it, and an acquittal is pretty much guaranteed. So where does that leave us, I guess? There are a few groups out there that are trying to redress the lack of lynching records. That's part of this work here in terms of collecting oral histories. That's a piece of it. Documenting the Now is a group that is collecting a lot of Twitter data. They collected a lot of data, something like 92 million tweets after Ferguson. And you can find that at DocNow, docnow.io. If you actually want to see the data sets, you may go there and you may use them. People are doing things like boxes under the bed workshops, where archivists will go into communities and say, what do you have at home? You may not know that you have a valuable record at home, and let's bring you in. We'll teach you how to digitize those records. We'll make them a part of our permanent historical records to fill those gaps and vagaries where they exist. And then we do now live in a culture of radical record making, where things like Facebook Live, I just said a thing about modification, allows you, you think about the Diamond Ronald's Facebook Live video when Rhonda was murdered, how there was, there's video evidence of it happening as it unfolds. Many of us, most of us probably walk around with cell phones that have cameras. So we are sort of citizen documentarians, and we all have an opportunity to create records and fill in those gaps and vagaries in the historical record where they exist. The flip side of that is that we are also now living in a different era in terms of our political climate in the administration that's in Washington. And some folks want to call it post-truth. For me, I don't so much like that phrase, post-truth, but I do think that we are in an era where records are under attack with veracity. And, what good is it to have receipts if nobody believes that the receipt is real, right? So archivists are among those who are challenging some of the ways that data is used, particularly around issues of mass incarceration, around, there's a data for Black Lives movement. There's a lot of work being done by archivists to kind of challenge the narratives and the way that data is presented to us, both historical and contemporary data. But I have to ask myself, are we as archivists contributing to the distrust of records? And so the next step in my work, in my research, is to really start thinking about how archivists can challenge the narratives that are coming out of the records without contributing to doubt in the historical record and the veracity of those records as they are created or as they currently exist. So, what are the ramifications and implications of that? In my teaching, I teach a class called Archival Access, Representation, and Use. I'll give you a second to pass tonight. Last spring, this class, we had a collection of materials that had been sitting in the Lion House Museum, Historical Society. I think it's Historical Society. Anyway, it was a collection of materials from the Lamar Lion family. And they were a family, they owned a small business, and they have a big house in, Demopolis, Alabama. We're going through this, it's a group of 8 students and me, and the materials have been just sitting there kind of building and holding. They're stuck together and no one's really paid any attention to them in about a decade. And in there we actually found some lynching photographs and some racist paraphernalia and some racist postcards. One that depicts a Black man eating a piece of watermelon, and the caption says, "The only time my ears get properly cleaned is when I eat a piece of watermelon." It's this huge piece of watermelon, right? And so the rinds are up here. It's so deeply offensive. And my students just didn't know what to do with it. And so that's another part of the contribution that I'm trying to make when I teach, is to have my students confront and then be uncomfortable and then learn how to sit with that discomfort until they're prepared to move and make changes. So thank you. It's really what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you, Ron. I am a bit of a cold that got started last week, so bear with me on that. The Civil Rights Institute, now in its 25th year of service to the local community, is a state-of-the-art museum facility housing exhibitions that depict historical events from post-World War I legal segregation to present-day racial progress. The Institute is also a cultural and educational research center that promotes a comprehensive understanding and appreciation for the significance of civil rights developments in Birmingham, with an increasing emphasis on the international struggle for universal human rights. Since 1992, the Institute has promoted an ongoing research and discourse on human rights issues locally, nationally, and internationally, through all its archival and educational programs and projects. It serves as a national resource for scholars, educators, researchers, and a host of other professionals who are interested in the civil rights movement. To carry out these objectives, the Institute identifies, collects, preserves, and makes available for public use personal papers, organizational records, and artifacts in the civil rights movement from the city of Birmingham, the state of Alabama, and the U.S. Each educational program is directed at both in-school and out-of-school audiences and is designed to make the Institute a vital part of the lives of area residents while serving as an exciting attraction for out-of-town visitors. The Institute also hosts and sponsors traveling exhibitions, lectures by noted personalities, workshops, conferences on a variety of topics, and offers a wide range of artistic activities. The Institute is an AAM accredited history museum, a research facility, a center of learning, and a place of teaching. Since opening, we have had over 1 million visitors experience the civil rights movement as told through its galleries and exhibitions, an average of 160,000 people each year. The story that is revealed examines the implications of this experience to the lives of our visitors and to related events, both past and present. The Institute's belief is that awareness of this part of our country's story is important because it represents a true turning point in American history. The museum component encourages people to examine basic issues of morality, law, justice, and responsible citizenship. Individuals who come to the Institute gain a better appreciation for the importance of democratic institutions and social values. They also learn that silence and indifference to the suffering of others can only serve to perpetuate social problems and divisions. The exhibitions, information, and programming provided to the public by the Institute has the potential to help visitors develop an awareness of the value of individualism while encouraging tolerance and diversity in a highly pluralistic society such as ours. With few exceptions, the projects and programming conducted by the Institute appeals to an out-of-school audience. Our visitors enjoy a balanced level of access to information that is inspiring and enlightening. The content of the material builds a strong case for using the events of the past to assess the directions that can be taken into the future. Many individuals, including older adults, respond positively to what they see when visiting the Institute. Even more impressionable are the younger visitors, aged 16 to 21, who in many instances upon coming to the Institute received their first exposure to this description of American history, which places the civil rights movement in its proper historical context. The Institute's collections include archival documents and oral histories, photographs, and fine art consisting of more than 10,000 archival materials, over 600 oral histories, 6,000 plus three-dimensional artifacts and photographs, and 364 fine art pieces. Most of the archival collections are stored in a 1,000 square foot area that includes a vault. All processed collections are stored in acid-free boxes placed on museum-quality compact shelf. Currently, the archive holds more than 580 large and small manuscript and records collections, more than 340 artifacts, over 600 oral histories in video and audio-only formats, with about half transcribed, as well as all the institutional records of the Institute. The archival collection includes correspondence, journals, diaries, and memoirs, speeches, photographs, films, video and audio tapes, scrapbooks, legal documents, financial records, brochures, flyers, handbills, posters, business records and ledgers, organizational minutes and reports, church records and sheet music, and government documents. It preserved personal papers such as correspondence from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and court records concerning the Reverend Fred L. Shuttlesworth. Irreplaceable artifacts such as shattered glass from the windows of the bombed 16th Street Baptist Church, original newspaper editions of the Birmingham World, the city's first weekly African-American newspaper, and videotape interviews with numerous individuals involved in various aspects of the civil and human rights movement. The Institute also has a fine arts collection consisting of 364 pieces, including sculpture, paintings, photographs, lithographs, mixed media, and several exhibitions that have been acquired over its 25-year history. Some of the more notable artists featured include Jacob Lawrence, San Gilliam, James Van Der Zee, Margaret Burroughs, Spider Martin, and Chester Higgins. Of the 364 pieces in its art and photography collection, 289 are included in intact exhibitions. The crown jewel of the BCRI Archives Department is its oral history project. Launched in 1994 under the direction of Dr. Horace Huntley, the project has recorded first-hand video and audio tape accounts of the civil rights movement from veterans of the struggle for change. Numerous books, works of juvenile fiction and nonfiction, journal articles, play scripts, documentaries and feature films, student research papers and projects, and other materials have been produced from research using the collection. In these interviews, African American and white interviewees speak about multiple efforts to secure equal opportunities in many fields, including labor and equal employment, pay equalization, fair housing, and education in singular ways that must be examined for a full understanding of the social and political history of Alabama and the nation. Just this month, the Institute received a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services and one from the Coca-Cola Bottling Company to digitize interviews from its oral history project to allow broad access to scholars and the public. The digitized materials will become part of the infrastructure for managing our digital assets. Right now, the Institute cannot easily provide access to a broad audience nor organize and retrieve content from its continually expanding archive of audio and video collections. When a researcher or visitor to BCRI is interested in viewing or listening to interviews from our collections, access can be provided only by way of an in-person, on-site visit to our building here in Birmingham. Additionally, the Institute lacks the ability to make these collections available to our website visitors. By creating digital copies and placing them within the required digital asset management system, the Institute will transform the way it delivers content to students, scholars, researchers, patrons, other supporters, and the public. The system will also maximize the Institute's ability to provide a diverse and global audience with online access to our oral history collections via mobile and web applications, including the BCRI website. The system will also allow in-person visitors to the Institute by way of the on-site Richard Harrington Jr. Computer Gallery, which is upstairs in this building, to learn about the experiences of these individuals and the rich history of Birmingham's role in the civil rights movement. The project goals are to preserve the collection by transference to current digital formats to make this collection, which is of vital importance to the study and interpretation of local and national cultural and social movements initiated in Birmingham, Alabama, accessible to scholars and the public globally, and to enhance intellectual control of the collection for internal management and dissemination via the internet. The Oral History Project collection interviews are a dramatically important resource for the study of Birmingham, a city nationally significant for its role in the American Civil Rights Movement and for demonstrating numerous influences across social and political developments, both in this country and abroad. Digitization of the Oral History Project collection will benefit scholars, researchers, educators, visitors to BCRI, and the Institute staff. Scholars, researchers, and educators will find a treasure trove of primary source material related to the history of the Civil Rights Movement that will inform their work. Visitors will be able to access information via the internet about the historical context of the movement in preparation for a tour or to extend the experience afterwards. Better internal access to the Oral History Project collection will aid BCRI staff in serving on-site researchers and producing a variety of outreach activities, such as creating exhibitions, both physical and digital, enhancing public tours, publishing books and articles, and marketing and communications activities for and about BCRI. Other institutions and consumers of media will be able to access our content, which might supplement or complement their own collections and programs, opening new possibilities for collaborations and/or use by commercial producers. Finally, by digitizing the oral history project collection interviews, their content and context will be preserved, protected, and administered for the benefit of future users. Because of this initiative, each year, thousands of in-person and virtual visitors will enhance their knowledge by accessing the unique digital content provided by this collection. With an institutional archive of interviews that includes over 600 audio and video recollections of marchers, demonstrators, and individuals who were arrested and are attacked by police dogs, there are hundreds of hours of important content that will contribute to the ever-expanding dialogue that impacts African American culture. Visitors will have unprecedented access to thought-provoking content that prevents the recent history of the human rights movement in America. The project will also enable the Institute's staff to improve the management and care of the online collection and create easy access to digital assets that will be used to promote BCRI, build exhibition content, and share educational and outreach programming with the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne, Marjay, and Tonia. We heard three different but interesting perspectives of archives. Archives as 3D objects, commodification of documents. I'm just thinking paywall, Marjay. Your materials are so inspirational, and it's from a perspective that not many people are thinking about. Not only are you looking at it in terms of the visualization of a map, but that the individuals who are behind this movement beyond IUOs. And, just, I was really impressed by the level of technology. And I know computer people always talk about how easy it is, but it's really not. There's no such thing as a novice learner when you have to do programs like that, projects like that. But I saw so many of you nodding and smiling, and I was just hoping that you would have some questions for our panels.
RJ, I wanted to ask you if your map of the United States, is it just the 50 or the 48 contiguous states, does it also include Alaska and Hawaii, and does it also include current U.S. territories, former U.S. territories, colonial possessions and whatnot?
Thank you for calling me on that. The database I created has a few in Alaska from an author who recorded them. It's before Alaska statehood, but after the United States purchased Alaska. I published the map, and somebody tweeted me and said, "You're missing someone in Hawaii." So I said, "Give me a source," and I, went and investigated it. It turns out a Japanese man was lynched in Hawaii, and however, it was the Kingdom of Hawaii at the time. So I was debating, is that part of this project? But the story behind it, which I won't go into now, essentially that he was murdered by newly white citizens, the white citizens that white wealthy people in Hawaii had earned themselves the right to vote and murdered this gentleman. The kingdom officials did try to arrest him and put him on trial, and he did go to jail. He was then pardoned the very day that Hawaii became a state of the Union. And then to your point about territories, no, not at all. I'm not done with my project apparently. Yes, yeah. Yes. Going blank.
I wanted to ask when you say racialized, do you mean racialized as in skin tone alone, or racialized as in the process of creating other groups to strengthen your own identity?
specificity of language there, you're right. Yeah. That's my son. He's gonna be up there. Today, as I defended my dissertation, he asked me the hardest question that anybody had answered.
I'm wondering if RJ would add to this collection. When I researched at Tuskegee, Monroe's work did not include my father. There was one person who was killed in 47, acknowledged as a lynching, but my father was not.
Thank you for pointing that out. One of the sources that you can click on to get the bibliography is the Equal Justice Initiative. They independently of Tuskegee, have created a database that is more accurate. And to their credit, have gone to the original primary sources to document many more lynchings than are published in scholarly books that I use. But their data isn't available to download or for me to incorporate, but they have highlighted the stories of your fathers and of others, and I have the ones that are public I have put on the map. So Elmore Bowling is on the map, and I just your pamphlet has the plaque that is there, so I put the terminology of that plaque on the map. And then just give me the opportunity to say that at the end of this project, I have this database, turn it out on 700 pages, and I'm delivering it back to Tuskegee University Archives, so it will be a record that can be accessed.
I wanted to say something about the sanctuary collection of lynching postcards that Rhonda brought up earlier. So they were collected by a gentleman and his partner over a period of time. They went to flea markets and yard sales and kind of gathered them where they could. And they had a relationship with Emory University. The materials were there for a while. The postcard collection was there for a while. And I haven't been able to figure out, because nobody wants to talk about what went down, but
He got mad at the university.
that was my understanding. That there was some kind of falling out around the handling, but it's never been clear to me what sort of the specifics of the falling out were. But they are now they're in Atlanta. It's a very small repository, and when I reached out to that repository to find out if I could take a look at these postcards, they said that the collection is closed for access. You actually cannot see the postcards, you can't access them, and they are struggling with how to preserve them because they're old and they're starting to decay and fall apart. So, as Wayne talked about these digitization efforts, that's something that it sounds to me like they don't have the means right now to do that digitization work. And until that happens, that collection will remain sort of closed.
I wanted to also say something.
For a while, it was a traveling exhibition, and we had it here at the Institute just years ago. But it is also a publication.
It's a coffee table. It's back to commodification, though. I mean, it's a coffee table. Right.
So, I just wanted to say that this is not for this session, because we've done a lot of work in the last 2 days, and people are tired. But at some point, we do have to confront the barriers that the term lynching presents to our research. Because people realize that, to get closer to my point, I want to go back to the case that Scotty Kirkland described, the 1981 Mobile case, in which the guy was killed and then his lifeless body was hung. Now, he called that a lynching. Why? Because ultimately he was hung. But the horror didn't have anything to do with the tree. So there's a way in which you either have to expand the definition of lynching beyond what people consider to be the image of the lynching. Excuse me?
I said the mode of death.
The mode of death, yeah. Beyond the mode of death, either the lynching has to be, the definition has to be thin, or we have to get away with it altogether, because there are deaths that are functionally the equivalent of what people recognized in that sanctuary book and so on and so forth, and in the earlier accounts. And, and this goes to the question that Joe asks is, and that she encountered in her own research, why isn't that a lynching? Well, of course it is a lynching, but as long as we don't collectively, those of us who are working in this area, figure out a way to get our vocabulary to work for us, we're going to run into this problem over and over and over again. So I'm just talking to all of us who are working on this collectively, that has got to be the next chore.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
So,
As an educator, I deal with kids every day. I wish we could use your system as a way of affecting the minds of these kids, because it's so unrealistic to them. I've probably been to the funeral of at least 75, 80 guys that I've taught, and maybe 10, 15 on the way, because I have a list of them. My wife taxed me for keeping an archive of this stuff, but can't help but do it. But if we can use your research to affect the minds of these young guys and young girls, girls too are very violent prone.
I'll make sure you get the cards and have a conversation about that.
I would love to have your presentation on school Monday morning.
I'm starting an oral history program with my classes and my students, and we're starting to archive them in our library. I do know all about having the release forms, and are there some things that you can just say kind of quickly that we need to make sure we're doing, or is there, I know from the World History Association, that sort of thing, I have those kinds of things, but are there some pitfalls I need to be more aware of, or is there anything you can suggest if you want to try to deal with these issues?
Well,
think about transcription.
Well, our students have to transcribe them before they're...
That has to be part of it,
Yeah,
the other
it is.
half to it, because if you're not going to transcribe and make them available, it's really not working.
And I know that from my own as a historian, so I have made that.
well, I would suggest that you use OHA as a resource, because they have numerous publications that you can get that will help you through the technical side of it. It never has to be an expensive process. It can be done very inexpensively. And I think one thing we found that was really important over the years as we did the interviews was that we used the individuals who we contacted to give us contact with other individuals who we could then interview, because in a lot of instances these folks knew each other, they might have worked together, they were part of what Reverend Shuttlesworth might have been doing, what the churches were involved in, what organizations might have been involved in. And so to broaden the base of your contact list, individuals themselves that you talk to eventually, I think that they would be a good source of other contacts for you.
The other thing I would recommend is make sure that you're in conversation with the archives about their migration policies, because what was, we all had our MP3s, right, and that's already dead technology, and all of the things that were recorded on MP3s, music and whatever, now have to be migrated to MP4, which is now considered the most up-to-date stable format. So I would just, make sure that you're in conversation with them about their migration, so that all of that work doesn't bend at all.
Well, and on that point, she's right. She's absolutely right about transferring from a format to another format, because we have a lot of hours on videotape, might be digital or just VHS tapes, some of them that are really old, like that. But I think you have to keep in mind that you will always have to do that. The formats of the day change very quickly because of the kind of industry that it's all part of. So you might have to build that into your considerations down the road, and by down the road I mean years into the future, that eventually you may have to, you will be faced with dealing with the format that you currently have material in on, and going to another format that might be more current.
I think that's why transcribing and having paper is
digitalization and records management.
As I said, that we really did say the best. This is the best, and we have more of the best to come. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you all. And we're going to close with two remarks. In law, we would call them, what would we call them? Closing arguments. Tell, it's been a while since I've been closing arguments, thank you. And they are from Montre Carrington, who's professor of law at the School of Law here at the University of Alabama, and our very own Rose Altesh, also a professor of law and associate director of the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. And after that, we do invite those of you who are able to stay to tour the museum. And please remain in contact with us. Please make sure that you have signed our registration list, either Dr. Bowling's list or we have a registration list. Make sure we are in touch with you. And for those of you who are real gluttons for punishment, please join us on March 3rd in Selma, Alabama. It's going to be an awesome, exciting, and very different project. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me and for staying around and for the invitation. It's been absolutely wonderful what I've heard and experienced here. I'm so glad I'm here. It's one of the few things I've become indoctrinated here in Alabama since I've been here. It's one of the few things that I think is more important than football games right now. So I came yesterday. I was telling somebody that I went to Huntsville yesterday with my son's school to the Space Museum, or the Space Center. And so I was exhausted and got back there, but I knew this was going to be an important event and I would learn a lot. And it's really such an understatement to tell you that I learned a lot. Let me present my evidence that I did. The first thing I want to tell you a little bit about myself in terms of what I do. I'm a professor of law at the University of Alabama School of Law. I teach evidence, and lately I've been teaching an advanced evidence course on major race trials, and we immerse ourselves in the concept of race as evidence. I've written extensively in that area and continue to do so, and I've learned so much here today that has energized me to keep going. And what I want to do is just encourage you very briefly, because I know it's late in the day, but encourage you very briefly to keep doing what you're doing. What you're doing is preserving testimony for the record. Testimony is one of the law's most important practices, and frankly, as been said, it's one of the law's most important practices and sources of knowledge. I think it's probably the most important. It's the most basic, fundamental, and important piece of evidence or type of evidence that the law has to offer in the courtroom, and most importantly outside of the courtroom. And often in these situations we wonder whether or not justice has really been served, or sometimes we have to acknowledge that it hasn't been served for the individual, and that happens in court. But what we do is we preserve our objections for the record, and we preserve evidence for the record, the historical record for the future. And I can attest to you that it matters to the students. So most recently in my major race trials class, we looked at the case of Jack Johnson, first heavyweight boxing champion in the United States. And there was a wonderful documentary that Ken Burns did. I see some heads nodding, you've seen it. It's an amazing, remarkable journey that we're taken on and immersed in. And I invest the time with my students to watch watch every moment of that. And someone talked about the difficulty of processing all of this information sometimes, and I notice that. Sometimes we'll take a little break, we'll have conversation, and I give them permission if they need to leave for a second and come back, that type of thing. It is difficult to process, but we do have to, I think as was said earlier in the previous panel, to have our students sit with this material and be uncomfortable sometimes, but they learn a tremendous amount. More than they're going to learn, for those of you who have taught law, from those cases in these case books, which are heavily edited, which take out the inventory, which take out other language that makes people uncomfortable. So they have to immerse themselves in it, listen to it, hear it, see the images, see the bodies, and fully experience it in a way that just reading a case that's heavily edited on paper doesn't do. So I encourage you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. I'm definitely going to use much of, if not all of what I learned today in class. And I want to just close. I hadn't planned to do this, but I must, with telling you about a specific case that I'm definitely going to talk about in evidence class, in my major race trials class. And it's the Minden case. I'm from Minden, Louisiana. I'm from Webster Parish. I've never attended a conference, ever, and I've been all over the country, where somebody brought up my hometown. So I present myself to you as evidence that the truth can't stay buried. Nobody taught me about that case, about John Jones in my hometown. And I was curious about race and the law and civil rights. And you know, I was the type of student at school who would get angry when I would see the word nigger in books that had nothing to do with civil rights. And I knew there was more, and I would challenge teachers to give us more. And I know there were people who taught me about this. I know that I went to school because I looked up the case while as you were talking. And it's your work. It's your work that is being referenced now when you Google John Jones in Minden, Louisiana. And some of the people who were quoted in some of the newspaper articles and the local television stations, these are people whose kids I went to school with, like, who were involved, whose family members were involved in it. So there are people who knew about it, and they don't talk about it to the kids. But truth won't stay buried. That's why we're resurrecting their stories, because the truth refuses to stay buried. So I would guess that in a little town like Minden, Louisiana, with about 15,000 people, just a little dot on the map, if it's on the map at all, and I'm pretty, I know my town pretty well, I think I'm the only professor of law who teaches race and evidence from that area. And for me to be here at that moment to hear about that case is really, that's just God to me. I just, you know, that's amazing. I was tearing up as you were talking about it. And yeah, you might have to go to the Smithsonian, you know, or you might end up at the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, as a girl who grew up saying Roll Tide in Minden, because our mascot is the Crimson Tide. You know, these connections. So you may have to go to the Smithsonian, but it's going to come to you. That's what I learned, that the truth has to be told. It has to present itself. It will be told. Keep doing what you're doing. You're touching lives. You're affecting people. And you are preserving the record of history. So God bless you.
Both of us teach evidence, and I think that that's actually, in some ways, the way to end. Because what we're doing at this conference, the title for this session is called Facing Our Inherited Past. And certainly we're talking about, you never know what the past is going to come up and face here, right? So I think what I would like to say is there are three things that we're trying to do at this conference, and what we're trying to do with the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project from Law School. We're trying to both document the past, we're trying to challenge the past, and we're also trying to face the past. And all three of those are very complicated things, and things that I think we've really been exploring here at the conference, and I would like to expand on all three of them, and with that we really will bring it close. The first part is to document the past, and Andre just talked about the importance of testimony. I'm going to talk about the importance of documents and the importance of paper documents and preserving things as paper, because we do not know necessarily how times will change and technologies will change with this paper or etc. Like VHS got mentioned, MP3, like those are pat. So, but what I want to talk about are the documents and what the documents reveal. Now, as you know, as you've heard several times over the conference, what we do at the Civil Rights Restoration Project is we case by case by case. And what we do is we collect the documents and the story of the history of each murder one by one. And each one has its own particularities, but there are certain constants in terms of what we do. We absolutely amass the documentary evidence that exists, and that includes the death records, the birth records. We try to tell the story of the life that was extinguished, so we go into the history of the person's life, so that their death is not the only thing that we are recording, although we're recording killing by killing by killing. And then what we do is we go past the killing and talk about the legal sequelae. Because after all, we are a law school, so what we want to do is talk about the absence or the presence of law. And what these documents really do reveal is really a kind of an interplay, a very important interplay between violence, the threat of violence, the expression of violence, and white impunity. And only the legal documents absolutely get at that piece of the story. So what we're really talking about is the threat of violence, the fear of violence, the violence that undergirded Jim Crow, the violence that enforced it, the violence that really absolutely was the expression of it, and the idea that that violence, that threat of violence, the randomness of that violence, but the predictability of that violence, that absolute rhythm is absolutely the life that was lived in Israel and the 100 years of Reconstruction. And absolutely what is going on in terms of the stories that we document is the rhythm of that, case by case by case. And each case is a story, but the whole thing together, that's a history. And that's really what we're doing, is we're amassing case by case so that we can have a sense of the history. Now the documents, as opposed to the testimony, because in some cases we're past the moment where we can get testimony. It's a certain kind of testimony. And that's really the trauma and the resonances of that in a community and for a family. So part of what we do and what we're doing in rooms around this meeting and bringing to you up at this table is the testimony and the story of how that story of the killing has resonated within a family and the community. Both the silences and the stories. Now I want to just put one piece of documents, and that's to really contrast something's with testimony, because evidence comes in three forms. It comes in documents, it comes in real evidence, physical evidence, it comes in testimony. Those are the three sources of evidence. Now, I'm going to focus on the documents. I'm going to talk about one kind of document that we collect in every single case, and that is the death certificate. We have a collection of death certificates, and what you find on those death certificates are two really extraordinary categories. There are, of course, variations, but there are two different categories that are a way of characterizing those death certificates. In one of them, you absolutely, and it's breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking for students. When they see that on the death certificate, it says lynching. It says it right there. It says cerebral hemorrhage. It says hung by rope. It says that on the death certificate. Now, you have to just, I want to pause for a second and have us just really think about that for a moment. The medical examiner in the corner, the person filling out the death certificate. Again, think about this as an arm of the state. We were talking about the arms and legs of Jim Crow. We're talking about yesterday in particular the idea of government involvement. That is a government official who is absolutely, without hesitation, writing the word lynching or rope or hanging right there in documentary form. And at the other hand, we have documents that say by persons unknown. Right? So when we have a collection of death certificates, of documents, we have irrefutable evidence of incredible stories. Right? So I want to use that phrase, I want to highlight that phrase, incredible evidence of incredible stories. That is a phrase used by Robert Jackson at the Nuremberg trials when he was talking about how you actually present a prosecution case for a trial. You have to have not just testimony, because people's memories, they may fade, they may have biases, all the things that we teach in evidence law about how to cross-examine. What we're talking really about is also the documents. And here the documents are telling us an unbelievable story with absolute sense of impunity. Because the other piece of what we're talking about is the violence and the threat of violence that we were to prove, but it was also under was the sense by the people that they could get away with it. That they could do it in plain sight, and it could be recorded as a lynching, as if it were by people unknown. Right? So that's kind of just really stunning. It's just a stunning piece and a stunning collection of documents that tell us something about the past. And these are the documents that we are collecting as we go on this granular level, case by case by case. Now, the second thing that I wanted to underscore is that we at CRJ and everybody here in this room, and really the stunning presentations that we have been privileged to hear for a day and a half, of challenging the story, of expanding the story, of actually changing our view of what the narrative is, and having a much more complicated view of what the story is. I mean, I was really very struck by Scotty Kirkland's discussion of our students. Princess McCann was talking about his work for Rhonda Museum and the received history about figures and the challenging of the received history. The documentary evidence and the case-by-case approach that we are doing is allowing connections to be made. So that, for example, yesterday, we only talked about 4 or 5 cases, but in 2 of the cases we were talking about the same bridge, right? We're talking about hangings at the same, groundings from the same bridge. We're talking about Fred Shuttlesworth, half-brother, who was killed off of a bridge, and that same bridge coming to the Indians case. We were talking about the same bridge twice, and we didn't plan that. That's just the kind of thing that you can see when you take the collection and do an archive, and do it not just case by case, but you amass the documents, and you amass the stories, and you start to see the connections. You start to see when John LaFleur was sent in as the NAA investigator in case after case after case. You get to see when a particular FBI agent is sent down from Washington by the FBI, and no investigation happens when he does the investigation. And you can only do that if you're amassing an archive. You have to do that by having all of the cases. And those are the things that will then challenge the narrative, will complicate the narrative, will expose the narrative, and have you have a much deeper and richer understanding of the history that we are now trying to tell. The last piece is to face the history. And that's, in some ways, the most complicated piece. But the first thing that I think this conference, this workshop, this really has been in some ways a conversational workshop as much as it's been a conference. Carried out in the halls, carried out at lunch, carried out the conversations that we're having in this room. What we're trying to do by facing history, trying to know this history in a granular and deep and broad level, is actually, first of all, to know it and to understand that we are the heirs of it. And really, the title of the session is Facing Our Inherited Past. I want to talk about the fact that an inheritance, the idea of being someone's heir, of carrying your father's story, right? And bringing your father's story to this conference for all of us to know. The idea that this is ours to own, that this is what has passed along to us and we need to actually own it in our time and place. The idea that it is ours to face, the idea that it is ours. Actually, if you're going to live in this country, whether you came here, when you came, or whether your parents participated in this or not. If you are here now, then it's yours. That is a great piece of our citizenship. That really is about what it means to face it. Because if you're going to face it, then you're going to absolutely own it. And, you know, we call our archive facing the unknown stories or the untold stories, and it's absolutely true. But I think what this conference has done is show the paradox of that. And here's the truth of the matter. These stories aren't unknown to the people in this room, right? These stories have not been untold by the families whose lives this were. Where they're unknown and untold is in the history books and in the memorialization of memorials that don't exist. Right? That EJI thing that there are no markers, right? There are markers of this and this and this and this and no markers of this is what we're trying to change. So we're documenting it in order to challenge it, in order to face it, because that is what it means to inherit. And I guess this is the last thing with which I'm going to close. I'm going to use a legal thing about the oath. Okay, we're going to take evidence, we'll talk about the oath. The oath is to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? And that is actually what it is that I think that we're doing at this conference by documenting, by challenging, and by facing, is we are really looking at the possibility of taking an oath between us and history, between us and our inheritance, between us and the now. Because the only way that a verdict, which actually means to tell the truth, that comes out at the end of the judgment of history, is if you put all of the truth in, not just half truths. They may be complicated truths,